Live, your community mental health. Today, we are talking about honest talk about suicide. This is part 2 of our suicide series. If you recall, our last program talked about QPR, question, persuade, refer, which is a very important evidence-based program to help us understand about suicide prevention and suicide warning signs. NAMI is offering another QPR on Zoom on December 8th. Please go to namimiami.org/QPR. It will be the best hour you have ever spent. I'm Susan Racher, your host for this session. I am board president of NAMI Miami-Dade, the Miami-Dade and Keys affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the largest peer-to-peer mental health organization in the country. NAMI's programs are all free to the community and are produced and facilitated by individuals like myself with lived experience with mental health conditions or with loved ones, as I have, with a mental health challenge. We know that the alarms have been raised about suicide in our community and in our country. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the Surgeon General, the CDC, the New York Times, AARP, the list goes on and on, the Miami Herald, have all raised alarms. In response, NAMI has developed a robust program of suicide prevention and outreach because education is key and education can save lives. We have also launched a media campaign through print media, television, vehicles such as community news, and thank you very much to Michael and Grant Miller, and billboards and other social media to get the word out because education is critical. We need to encourage people to get help. And today we're going to talk about what does help look like. We will be talking about therapeutic and clinical interventions for individuals living with mental health conditions and with suicide ideation. And I am so thrilled to welcome today Zili Huma. Welcome, Zili. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Susan.
Zili is an MSW and licensed clinical mental health counselor. She is program coordinator at a very innovative program at the University of Miami, UHealth, in suicide prevention for adults. Zili has dedicated her entire career to counseling and helping those with mental health challenges and suicide ideation. And we welcome you and look forward to your helping us understand what we can do when someone we care about is encountering these challenges. So I'd like to start by telling us, how did you become involved in this work, this very, very important work?
That's a really good question, Susan. It's been a long journey. I started my career out in California with an integrated healthcare system that was really interesting and innovative. We had a primary care and specialty departments all housed in one facility, and that includes psychiatry. So we had so much ability to treat the whole patient, which I think is really important in healthcare and in healthcare models. And so in that setting, I was able to kind of work in psychiatry, specializing in mental health and more specifically in helping patients who are high risk. I worked in the intensive outpatient program. I later managed that program. I worked in the dialectical behavior therapy programs, and we developed treatments and programs that would help patients who needed the help and needed to be stabilized from a recent psychiatric hospitalization where they may have made suicide attempts or were kind of at a really vulnerable place. And so those treatments and that work was really valuable because when I relocated and came here to Florida, I wanted to look for a setting that would offer me the same type of work and maybe even enhance that training. And so that led me to a University of Miami health system where as the psychiatry department was given a generous donation by a private donor who was very passionate about suicide prevention and had been personally affected by suicide. And he wanted us to create a program that would help these individuals and utilizing treatments that were evidence-based, that were shown to help, that were shown to work. And we know that dialectical behavior therapy is at the forefront of helping patients who are high risk for suicide and self-harm behaviors. And so we created the therapeutic program for adult suicide prevention. And that's where we provide DBT treatment. And it's been a really rewarding journey starting that about 3 years back, and we're expanding. So good news is that we're able to help people and we're growing that program within the university and
saving lives.
Yes.
We've all been touched by suicide. And I'm passionate, as you know, about this topic. My son's best friend in high school ended his life in college, and it affected our whole family. It affected my son in particular, and the survivor guilt and the outgrowth of that is really underappreciated. You know, I read somewhere that 135 people are directly affected and challenged with their own mental health wellness after having someone in their sphere and their lives. Why is this happening? What do you see? You know, I mentioned in the introduction that hardly a day goes by where there isn't a headline, an unfortunate, tragic headline.
You know, there's so much happening in the world, so much in the world that we're more exposed to. I mean, we talked a bit about social media. We talked about just access to news and information. And we often can feel very helpless. And I think that feeling of helplessness can be magnified if we struggle with any depression, anxiety, or vulnerability to mental health difficulties. And certainly we're learning a lot about, you know, younger folks and teens and adolescents and how difficult it is in schools, the bullying, and just the different avenues of bullying that can occur that can lead individuals to feel very isolated, very alone, and maybe not have the avenues to connect to support systems, to their families, and may make very impulsive attempts that could be successful. And so we know there's, increased suicide rates. We know there's still, I mean, we've come a long way, but there's still so much stigma around mental health and seeking services and getting the proper help, the evidence-based help, the help that we know is more effective. We are seeing, there's lots of mental health topics on TikTok, on Instagram, and it's great that people are talking about mental health and diagnoses and treatment, but it may not always be accurate, right? It may not be the type of help that people really need to actually make measurable change. And so we want to make sure that individuals out there know that there's treatments available. There's treatments that we're doing at University of Miami Health System, and a lot of very qualified therapists who want to help, right? And NAMI is doing great work with suicide prevention education. And so that's the awareness that we want to spread.
Right. There are three pillars that I see as being huge barriers. And one is lack of education about what constitutes warning signs and indications of unwellness. The second is stigma, as you point out. And the third is that people don't know where to go. Even if they check the box, they understand something's wrong. They want to move forward. And that's why I think partnerships with between NAMI, which is on the education and prevention side. We're dealing with those first two pillars. Educating people and removing stigmas, saying it's okay, people recover from mental health conditions. There's help. There are incredible programs. We are so blessed to have the University of Miami in this town with a world-class Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science, both on clinical and research side. And so that NAMI is sort of at the front end of that conversation, trying to encourage help-seeking behavior. Once folks acknowledge that they need that help, what kind of help is available for them?
So what we're doing is we're open to the community. So the nice thing about our program is, we started in 2020. I was hired, and for a few months we were getting the footwork for developing the program. And right as we were about to launch, the pandemic began. And so we were faced with a challenge where we wanted to have this program be accessible to the people who needed it, but we also didn't want to limit it because, okay, we have a pandemic and we can't do in-person services. So we launched virtually. And, we've actually stayed virtual because we've found that the patients who've attended have liked that modality. It's more accessible for them. And we've also found that people who have, people who are immunocompromised, because now we've been expanding into our cancer center at Sylvester at University of Miami. And so those patients still want access to treatment, and they're immunocompromised, and maybe they're limited in how much they can travel to access services. So they're even able to attend. So we've remained in a telehealth platform.
So you're available and open and accessible to folks who may not have transportation, they may not be able to leave work.
Right.
That is wonderful. And you raised something with Sylvester. I have a close friend who was diagnosed suddenly with a major chronic heart condition. And she, aware of the work that my volunteer work at NAMI, expressed honestly that she thought about ending her life. She thought, I don't think I want to live with this. And so reaching out to that community of folks who may not have ever thought about self-harm, but have been dealt a very challenging diagnosis is so important.
So important. And so what you find is these layers of vulnerability, right? You have maybe pre-existing vulnerability because there's a past history of mental health diagnoses. And then on top of that, you have a layer now of a change in health status. And, cancer treatment, there's a lot of innovation and success that we see with cancer treatment, but we also see that it's very intrusive to people's lives, and it can shake someone's world. And so we've expanded our suicide prevention program to Sylvester. And so we've been able to provide treatments, mental health treatments through our psych oncology specialty program that help that patient population. Those are also virtual. And these programs, they are self-referred. They can be referred within our University of Miami system. They can be referred from the community. They can be referred from NAMI. They can be... We're open to helping whoever is able and ready to receive the treatment and participate and engage in the treatment. We also have some pro bono opportunities for those who need some financial support and don't have health insurance. And that's been something we've been so pleased to see. And we've had patients who really have participated pro bono for multiple cycles, right? And so that's been really positive to see.
And for those folks who have health insurance, please keep in mind that health insurance parity was adopted in 2008 for mental health conditions. And if your insurance company is not supporting your wellness program in mental health, please reach out to the company or to the insurance commissioner. There's an 800 number that you can get from NAMI to deal with that, because it should be covered as everything else is. But thank you for the pro bono work. That's
absolutely
incredible. You mentioned DBT. For those of us who are not aware, what is that? What does that look like?
Yes.
Is that group or individual or both? If you could
Yes.
just talk a little bit about what is the clinical
Yeah. So
response.
DBT, it's short for dialectical behavior therapy. It is an evidence-based treatment and one of the most effective treatments for self-injurious behaviors or self-harm, suicide, high-risk behaviors. And this treatment's a third wave. It's considered a third wave cognitive behavioral therapy. And so a lot of people are a little more familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a treatment that, helps us to understand how negative thought patterns or problematic thought patterns can impact emotions, which impact behaviors. And so DBT is kind of a spin from that. And it's a little bit of an extension of really targeting emotion and targeting challenging emotions that often can make us feel very overwhelmed and debilitated. And, we'll talk a lot with our patients where they may feel overwhelmed and like they're on a roller coaster led by the emotion. And so we talk about emotion, we educate, what are emotions? What are the functions of emotions? How do they help us? How do they impact us negatively? How do we change emotions that aren't working for us? And how do we increase emotions that we'd like to experience more of, right? Like the pleasure and the living a life according to our values.
So we can consciously rewire our thought patterns with DBT.
We absolutely can. And it's a very affirming treatment because it speaks to everyone's own unique history and experience and their experience of their emotion. Right. And we know that varies from person to person based on their life experiences, based on who they are and what their vulnerabilities are. So it's a very validating, affirming treatment. That's what really drives my passion in this work, because I feel like it speaks to the humanity and the human aspect of our suffering. And DBT is also really innovative because the D in DBT stands for dialectical. So what is dialectics? And dialectics are when two opposing concepts are trying to intersect. And so we're always looking for opposites. And we know when people struggle with depression, anxiety, they often have real polarized thinking, real black and white, real all or nothing. And that thinking can really cause us a lot of suffering because we're not really able to see the gray area. We're not able to see what's happening in between. And so we look for opposites. And one, opposites that's central to our treatment is this concept of change, right? We're always working towards change. We're always working towards improving our mental health and trying to improve our symptoms. But we're also simultaneously working on acceptance. And so change and acceptance coming together is a dialectic.
Self-acceptance or
Acceptance
general acceptance or both?
All of the above, right? So it's acceptance of where I am, what's happening in this moment, what's my experience in this moment, whether it's pleasurable, unpleasant, what's happening in this moment. And just kind of landing in our seat in a real non-judgmental, curious way. And that's the acceptance piece. And we call that mindfulness, right? And mindfulness it's a buzzword nowadays. You see it in the grocery aisle on magazine covers.
But it's pausing and taking stock.
Absolutely.
And deciding if that's where you want to be at that moment.
Yes.
And moving away from that moment.
Right.
But that awareness is really important, and that discipline. I mean, it's a learned trait, is it not?
It's a skill.
It's a skill.
It's a skill. And so that's what we're doing in DBT. So we're working on changing emotions, behaviors, thoughts, and we're simultaneously accepting the ones that maybe we can't change. What's the pathway through this, right? So DBT really is a blend of change and acceptance, and we model that through the different skills that we're teaching patients. So DBT has 4 particular focuses in the treatment. So I talked a little bit about the emotion piece, the emotion regulation piece, because one of the disturbances you have, regardless of the diagnosis, is that we feel debilitated by emotion, right? Whether it's the emotion of depression and sadness or ones of fear and anxiety. And so we're working on understanding emotion and having better skills to cope with emotion. We're also looking at distress tolerance, right? We're teaching individuals how to cope with those high levels of distress. And we know that those high levels of distress are really debilitating, but they're short-term in nature. right? So you're not necessarily in a crisis for the duration of your life, even though you may have strong emotion. The crisis situations that are highly intense, highly overwhelming, where you feel this drive to like solve the problem and fix it immediately, that sensation is short term, right? And so if we can develop some capacity and some skills to tolerate those moments and use other skills to manage those emotions, it can keep us from acting on those intense emotions, which that action can lead us to self-harm and suicide and using substances. And so those are those high-risk behaviors. So the distress tolerance piece of DBT is also really helpful. We teach interpersonal skills that help us to increase assertiveness and being able to make a request and maintain relationships and be able to understand what our self-respect would look like. And then we talk a lot about mindfulness. So those are the 4 main components to DBT.
And you spoke, about impulsiveness and the resilience training as part of those pillars. We start our QPR prevention program by saying that not every suicide is preventable. But what we're trying to do is help folks have the skills to be able to open the conversation, to recognize that a conversation needs to be had, and create a safe environment for their friends or loved ones to be able to reach out. Given that most teen suicide tends to be impulsive, what can we do as a society, as parents, as teachers, as friends, to try to deal with that up front?
I think as parents, we need to educate ourselves on mental health and what are the signs of a mental health issue or mental health concern. What are symptoms? Sometimes we'll see that as like, this is a behavior problem, or my child has a lot of,
or they're a bad kid, they're lazy, or they're
aggressive. Or they're temperamental. But a lot of times depression and anxiety can look like that. Exactly. Right? It can look like that. It can look like someone who's a little bit more fatigued, who's sleeping a lot more, who's more quote unquote defiant, more irritable. And so those are some symptoms that could be warning signs. And so we know one protective factor for child and adolescent suicide is the connection to parents and family members. And so that connection is increased when we increase our education, so we know how to talk to our kids and we know how to be available to them if they are exhibiting any warning signs.
We often attribute those warning signs to stages in life. If they're teenagers, they're sowing their oats. If they're older folks, well, they're older. Of course they're going to be depressed. Right. If they're middle-aged, the work environment has changed, of course. I think we need to open our eyes and ears to what those warning signs are, and as you point out, to get educated and to create a safe environment for our loved ones to talk about it. I remember Congressman Jamie Raskin, interviewed after the loss of his beloved son, said the thing he regretted was that he and his wife talked with their children about everything. They never talked about self-harm or suicide. And he said, if I had to do it all over. And so I urge families like mine to become educated, to become educated through NAMI's programs, through the University of Miami resources and website, become educated. My son, I think, suffered for 2 years because we were in that population that thought, oh, he's off to college, it's a big new experience. He's in Cleveland, which the sun never shines. We attributed it to everything except the fact that he was encountering a mental health crisis, which is what prompted me to really try to reach into the community and educate folks so that they don't waste time in dealing with it. As you know, my son's story is a good one. He's recovered. He's wonderful. He's going to join you in the social work field next year. We're the lucky ones, but there are also countless kids on the street and countless others who are still suffering. And so education is absolutely key, and creating that open communication. And this is where neighbors, friends, teachers, as well as family members come in to help give a young person, a safe space to talk about it.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that protective factors, include that safe space, the even community. Like we know cultural factors, even religious factors, where people feel connected to a community or in a group of people is a protective factor for young people and adults.
Is having attempted a suicide a prediction of further attempts, or can they be stemmed? And what do you observe clinically?
So self-harm behaviors, even if it's like non-suicidal, self-injurious behaviors, those may not be done for the intent of to commit suicide. Those might be done to, relieve suffering, reduce pain. But we know that those can be predictors of later suicidal behavior, and it can increase the likelihood of suicidal attempts being made and successful attempts being made. And so absolutely attempts can increase likelihood of future
And self-harm
attempts.
would be things like cutting. Would
Cutting,
eating disorders be
burning.
in that category, or would that be something?
I think it's eating disorders can be separate because that's a separate diagnosis, and may not, binging, purging, restricting may not be done clinically speaking from a place of like self-harm intent. It might be more done based on body image and distorted thinking. But self-injurious behaviors are, can be done as part of like symptoms of mental health disorders and difficulties regulating emotion.
Right. Yeah. So in the couple minutes we have left, how do folks become connected with you? What resources are at the U for individuals who need help?
Absolutely. So patients can contact me directly, and I think there's probably some place where I can provide my contact information. They can email me directly, call me directly. I want to be accessible to our patients. They can contact our department, who can also make sure that they're connected with me or one of my team members. And so our goal is to be available.
And we are so fortunate to have resources in our community. And I want to spend the last minute or so talking about some of those resources. First of all, we have a wonderful organization called Thriving Mind South Florida that is actually supporting NAMI's Suicide Prevention Initiative. Thriving Mind is the overseer of a robust portfolio of providers, both residential and outpatient, mental health and substance use, from cradle to grave. ThrivingMind.org is a wonderful resource. NAMIMiami.org is our NAMI Miami resources. We have information about mental health conditions. We have 36 support groups a month, building community, both for families and individuals with mental health challenges, is very, very important. I attribute my son's recovery to the peer community that he developed as a participant in the NAMI programs. And folks, please, QPR, question, persuade, refer. It's evidence-based to educate families, teachers, providers, everybody in our community, just like we learned the Heimlich maneuver and CPR. Let's learn QPR. Not only what are the warning signs, but how to open the conversation, how to get comfortable with the conversation, or if you're not, how to identify somebody who can be.
Absolutely.
And so please go to NAMIMiami.org and also go to UHealth Any closing remarks, Zili, as we sign off? We have a few seconds left.
Thank
And
you so much for letting me
being
be
here
here
today and for the work you're doing. We are so
Absolutely.
blessed to have you in our community.
Oh, it's an honor to do this work, and I admire each and every one of my patients who comes to me. It's a humbling privilege for me.
And you're saving lives. You're saving lives every day with your clinical treatment and with the space that you're providing for folks who are struggling, and many folks are struggling right now. So please know there's help. You don't need to struggle alone. You are not alone. UHealth and NAMI Miami, and look forward to talking with you in our next session.
Thank you.